Sanbatskano. I'm Peter Bittner. You're watching Talk With Me.
Sanbatskano. Hello, and welcome to Talk With Me. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. Today's guest is Me Ц.Уранчимэг. She's the curator of this wonderful exhibit we're in today, and she's also a professor at University of California, Berkeley, and the co-chair of the Mongolia Initiative. Dr. Uranchimeg Sultam is a Mongolian art curator, researcher, and renowned academic. Erna earned her PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and her BA and MA from the University of Arts and Culture in Mongolia. Dr. Sultam is the co-chair of UC Berkeley's Mongolia Initiative, the founder of the Mongolia Foundation, and a leader in connecting international audiences to Mongolia's artists and works. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest.
You bet. So you're a very prestigious and well-known art curator, researcher, lecturer, professor. Can you tell us a little bit about this exhibit that we're in today?
Well, I've been curating Mongolian contemporary art in the past 20 plus years. I began early 1990s here domestically in Mongolia with the support of public affairs at Embassy of United States, because the public affairs section was open at the time and they allowed different shows to be mounted at the residence of the embassy. Then I moved to show Mongolian art internationally, and my exhibition in 1997 was in Japan, in Tsukuba, where I won the competition to use the architecture by a postmodern architect, Michael Graves. Michael Graves is an American architect who is famous for his color-oriented, eccentric architecture. And his rooms are very different from each other. One building, but it hosts golden room or pink or green, blue rooms. And in that architecture, I had a vision to mount 15 artists, and it was a very interesting job to show 15 different artists in this particular postmodern American architecture in Japan. So that was my very interesting start. And then I had an invitation to curate a show during a Mongolian event at New York, 2000. Then it just continued at UC Berkeley in 2005, 2009. Then in Asia and Hong Kong, 22 artists I showed in 2011, then in Shanghai Biennale, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
One of my prestigious shows was in Mongolia Pavilion at Venice Biennale, 2015, and then a solo show of a Mongolian woman artist, Me Ц.Уранчимэг, in 2015 at Venice Biennale. And this is my latest exhibition, which is a part of a big research project that I'm continuously doing at my institution in the United States. And this is about a history of Mongolian contemporary art. The history of Mongolian contemporary art did not begin in this millennium, but it has its roots in 1998-ish in Mongolia during the time of socialist regime. It was very interesting, adventurous beginning, and as a historian, I'm writing that history, and I would like to show that history in my exhibition.
I see in the exhibition there's not only art, but also primary documents from some of the original exhibitions from that time period.
Exactly. That was my idea, to really show how even the word contemporary art did not exist in Mongolian language. Even the word curator was not known at the time. But these artists who are now sadly half forgotten, they were very bold enough to be very true and loyal to their views, that there shouldn't be mainstream ideas and views on art. There shouldn't be any limitations to art. And when their works were discouraged to be shown in exhibitions, sometimes they were canceled. They were very loyal to their views. So they organized different organizations. Very well known is Green Horse organization, with such people as Edinbilik, Tathochur, Gansuch, Mashpat, Usupayr, And they showed separate exhibitions throughout Ulaanbaatar at the time. And they did works that were abstract, non-figurative, or they were distorted and exaggerated. They did not really follow the ideas of socialist realism or any type of realistic depiction. They were very, very, very ambitious, and they're very courageous. And I think it's kind of type of approach that we should be very proud of at the time. And we shouldn't be really forgetting. And I think their views, their manifestos, is the primary source that I would like to show, and I would like to really hope to be known now in this time period.
So these artists were pioneers, and they were also pioneers in an era with a lot of censorship, which makes them even more courageous.
Exactly. While most of exhibitions were censored, and most of exhibitions were following figurative depictions, realistic depictions, or socialist realism, these artists were really loyal to the views that freedom of art, freedom of views on art, and they remained very loyal to their views. They were not discouraged. They formed their organizations, their societies. They wrote their own manifestos, heralding these transitions in Mongolian democracy and Mongolian politics. Really, art brought the revolution that all layers of Mongolian society witnessed, right, in 1990. But they really heralded that beginning with their own freedom, ideas of freedom and ideas of culture and art at the time. And these artists, right now, they're still living on art. They're still showing their art, but this history is slightly forgotten, and I'm really trying to write this history, and I'm trying to show this art.
Right. And these artists then, they were not necessarily political at the time, were they? They were just expressive of their creative vision, is that
Exactly,
correct?
yeah. This is another very interesting aspect, Peter. I think it's very important to understand that politics were happening, but art was not connected with politics at all. I don't think that politics influenced art and made these artists so bold to start the societies. Because looking just at the date when these artists started to show art, it's heralding.
Wow.
They're really pioneers of that transition period. Green Horse had their meetings in 1989, and the first works in 1987 we have in this show, by Dalhocher, for instance, or by Gansuk. And their works showing something that's really is not about politics at all. They're showing people, herders, just very interesting single figures, or something that may be coming from historical documents such as Secret History of Mongolia. But they're not following that sort of mainstream thought that Mongolian history, secret history should be this way, or showing herders and marching, right, should be this way. It should be sort of very, very free and liberal in depiction, and you can see from their works it includes ornaments, it's very expressive, sometimes it's very dislodged from the countryside. For instance, looking at Gansuk's works, you really cannot say where it was really shown and from which part of the countryside it's shown, because it's kind of dislodged from particular location, but it's really showing the idea of Mongolian countryside.
Right. And these artists were also part of your experience as a young scholar at the time, right? So you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, you were aware of this movement at the time when you were studying, is that true?
Actually, I was a student still at University of Culture and Art, and I remember myself coming to one exhibition here, right here, in this very hall, and seeing plastic sort of kind of dividing the space into two different divisions. One area was showing our father's work, right? So very famous Mongolian artists who were trained in Moscow, who were trained in Leningrad, St. Petersburg, and showing works such as Odong and Sultam and Yadam Surang, things that treasures of our culture. However, there were different art that these guys, Edinburgh, and different figures of man, of humans, distorted, not following any anatomical perspectives, or Dathocher's work that are completely dislodged from any type of context, or Gansok's works, Hoygocher's works, which are very abstract and very, very colorful, very expressive. And I remember myself walking and thinking, what is this? And how this history is kind of connected or disconnected for what we sort of studied and what we kind of trained to understand, right?
Right.
And that a feeling of inspiration and that feeling of excitement and curiosity, really, right? As a student, I started to write about this, and I tried to really make an effort to understand that. And so my first articles really began to highlight this movement. And it took some time for me to get to know the artists.
Right.
Because I was so young and I didn't know the artists, and the artists didn't know me. And then we started to talk, and through my own publications, we got to know each other. And all these years we knew each other, and I think the collaboration between the scholar, between the art historian, curator, and the artist, it kind of bonded through many years. And it's continuously sort of growing into various different projects.
Tell me about your story with art. Obviously, from a very well-known artistic family, your father, your brothers Mungchin and Ingchin were a big influence on you growing up. And tell me about your decision to move into curation as opposed to creation.
Yes. Yes, I grew up in an artistic family, and I grew up as a child smelling the paint and seeing canvases, seeing drawings all over the place, seeing art journals, and hearing talks about art in my family. It was sort of my daily life.
Right.
I never thought to become an art historian myself, though. I was very good at languages. I was very passionate about English. I was very passionate about just generally about writing humanities, about culture, history. I was curious as a child. I learned English when I was a teenager, just listening to Voice of America and having just, passion about just British culture or American culture. At the time, it was all very censored, as you know. And art history is considered as humanities. And when I went to Hungary as a young student at the age of 18, I chose to be an art historian because I could understand art and I was very passionate about it. At the same time, I liked to write and I was passionate about languages. So those two passions sort of merged into one. And I was able to use them to my advantage to write about art and use my languages to be sort of international. And curation became as a part of the creative process to really my own effort to understand artists and to understand about art. I like to work with artists. I really like art as a creative process, and I like to see artists in the process of making art. And curation became as my own effort to bridge myself with artists.
That's really interesting what you said about bridging and connecting with artists. While you were doing your dissertation at UC Berkeley and ultimately getting your PhD in East Asian and Himalayan art, were you able to connect with artists through that process as well?
My dissertation at UC Berkeley was about Buddhist art, so it was historical.
Right.
And so I like to say that I have two legs of research. One is contemporary art, which predates my dissertation work at UC Berkeley. Throughout 1990s, I was more known and more creative as a curator and as a scholar of contemporary art. When I moved to United States as a doctoral student, my work more centered on Buddhist art. And my professor, Patricia Berger, is a scholar of Chinese art and Tibetan, Sino-Tibetan art. So under her supervision, my work really was focused on Mongolian history. And I had to work with Mongolian primary documents, writings by Mongolian Buddhist scholars such as Agwan Khadov, reading their works from 1830s and trying to understand what Mongolian Buddhist art is about and how is it either similar or original distinct from its neighbors, from Tibet, from China, from Inner Asia. So my dissertation topic was Ikhure and art in Ikhure, architecture, and my book is coming out based on my dissertation. Mongolian version of the book already came out in 2016, and my original monograph is coming out from University of Hawaii Press. It's under contract already, so
Great.
I'm
Congratulations.
expecting. Thank you. It's a big thing for a scholar.
It is.
That a book is coming out. I suppose it's coming out either in fall 2018 or in spring 2019.
Great.
And this is the work where I'm really talking about Mongolian Buddhist architecture, Mongolian Buddhist art, artists, and introducing the context, how these works were produced in Ikhure, and the scholars, Buddhist scholars, their primary sources such as Jibzon Dambas, Zanapazar, and Agwan Khadov, and so on and so forth.
So does your work with the Mongolia Initiative connect with your specific research then at UC Berkeley, or tell us about the story of the Mongolia Initiative?
Thank you for this question, because this is a very important work, and I think as a Mongolian American living in the United States, yet as a scholar of Mongolia, I see it as my mission to introduce Mongolia as a broader scale, not only art and culture as my major, but also really bring Mongolian studies to the United States. And why UC Berkeley? Why Mongolian Initiative at UC Berkeley? UC Berkeley is a unique university in a sense that it's one of the very first Western universities that taught Mongolian language. 1935, a German scholar, Ferdinand Lessing, who immigrated from Germany to United States, was invited by UC Berkeley to teach Mongolian language. And he wrote Mongolian English dictionary while he was a professor at UC Berkeley at the Department of Oriental Languages.
Wow.
An endowment that was placed to teach Oriental languages was used to teach Mongolian language. We're talking about 1930s. It's an exciting period when Mongolia is completely isolated. And Mongolia was not open to United States,
Of course.
but UC Berkeley was teaching Mongolian language. It was producing Mongolian English dictionary and such interesting sources as history, succinct history of Mongolia written by the first Prime Minister Amr were published by UC Berkeley in 1962. And we have that book. So this is a very interesting sort of time period when UC Berkeley was pioneering institution to introduce Mongolia to Western world through scholarship. And when Ferdinand Lessing retired, UC Berkeley continued its mission to teach Mongolian language, and it hired James Bosson, professor of Mongolian and Manchu and Tibetan. And Professor Bosson, starting from 1960s, he taught Mongolian, Manchu, Tibetan in UC Berkeley, and he invited also Mongolian lamas to teach Mongolian Buddhism. For instance, Dalai Lama Namgyal Dorje was one of lecturers in 1965, and he taught about Buddhist ritual, and his lectures were translated by James Bosson. And Professor Bosson, his students now are such prominent scholars as Vesna Wallace, who is a scholar of Mongolian Buddhism, and many, many Mongolians know her because she constantly comes to Mongolia as a part of her research. Right. Her works routinely published about Mongolian Buddhism. And James Boston's another prominent scholar is Mark Elliott, who is a professor at Harvard. And his main channel area of expertise is Manchu culture. But they all were taught by James Boston at UC Berkeley. And according to Mark Elliott, he says that James Boston was very multilingual professor, and he taught all those languages. However, Mongolian was his passion. He was really passionate about Mongolia and Mongolian language. In the 1990s, when Professor Boston retired, UC Berkeley lost the tradition due to the lack of funding. And when I came as a doctoral student in 2002 at UC Berkeley, unfortunately, the legacy was lost. And I became very active in trying to sort of revive that tradition.
Restore.
Yeah, and restore it. And with the help of my colleagues, my mentors, Professor Patricia Berger, and Institute of East Asian Studies, Martin Backstrom, Caroline Carey, we all worked together, and we were able, really, with the help of federal grant from United States, we were able to hire a lecturer to teach Mongolian language, Brian Brauman. And Brian teaches colloquial Mongolian, classical Mongolian, Mongol Bichik, and he also teaches classes Mongolian history and culture, contemporary Mongolia. My classes are about Mongolian art, Asian art, but I include Mongolia very much. And in 2015, when Mongolian government supported our initiative, we were able, they gave us seed money, and we were able to open Mongolia Initiative as a program, as a separate program within the Institute of East Asian Studies. And yeah, we were, as a part of this, we are active with monthly lectures about Mongolia, with events. Every September, we mount a very big international conferences, scholarly conferences on various topics. 2017, for instance, we had a topic, Mongolian Buddhism, and we brought international scholars from Europe, from Mongolia, from different Middle East. So it was international conference on Mongolian Buddhism. And next year it will be a conference on Ovo, on the worship of Ovo, working with anthropologists such as Marisa, Frank Billy, and so on and so forth. In other words, we're trying to keep alive the idea of Mongolia, the scholarship about Mongolia through our program. And our ultimate goal, our very ambitious goal, is to be very successful in funding, in gaining funding from various sources, and to establish a center for Mongolian studies at UC Berkeley. This is our ultimate goal.
Best of luck. Yeah,
thank you.
That's an important initiative. Sounds like you've played an instrumental role in helping to restore UC Berkeley as a center for intercultural kind of dialogue when it comes to Mongolian studies and research. So
that's right.
It's not just specific to funding art research, for example. It's quite general in terms of different academic fields. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. And it's nothing about art specifically. It's really about Mongolia. And we try to, because United States has Bloomington, Indiana as the major sort of site institution for Mongolian studies, where we used to have Christopher Atwood, one of our major Mongolists, Johan Elverskog, all coming from Indiana, Bloomington. Now Professor Atwood is at University of Pennsylvania, and we're still expecting that a new Mongolist will be based at Bloomington. At Berkeley, we try to cover different aspects of Mongolian studies, mostly contemporary Mongolia. But it's really interdisciplinary. And as a matter of fact, many fields, many departments at UC Berkeley have different projects ongoing, such as, for instance, our public education program has a project going with Professor Kirk Smith. And Professor Kirk Smith is a Nobel laureate in public health, and he has a multi-year project with University of Medicine here to solve the air pollution issues. And he has different very successful projects already completed, but they have Mongolian graduate Yuma Argo, Yumchundorj Argo, who is a graduate of public health, and they are continuously working with Mongolian counterparts to sort of as a sort of joint project. Then Department of Political Science has a number of Mongolian students. Their first student was Montai. She is a very successful, continuously within the political science. They're still having Mongolian students in their department, and their professor, Professor Steve Fish, has written about Mongolian democracy as a comparative analytical study of Mongolian democracy. School of Journalism, as you, Peter, has several graduates, right? Oyunder was one of our first graduates, and you are another graduate, our alumnus. And then we have School of Law, very famous and world famous School of Law, has several Mongolian graduates. And in fact, one of our professor of emeritus, Michael Shapiro, was one of our 2 foreign advisors to revision of Mongolian Constitution in 1992. And to celebrate anniversary for that, we had a democracy conference in 2017 where we had members of Mongolian government, such as members of parliament. Ihorov Lowalt was one of our presenters. Uranchimэг was another presenter. People who are not only political activists and politicians, but the people who are also sort of analyzing the democracy and constitution. They came to UC Berkeley, and together with political scientists at UC Berkeley, such as Professor Kevin O'Brien and Steve Fish, they had a scholarly conversation about what's happening about Mongolian constitution, Mongolian reforms, Mongolian mining, and Mongolian democracy, and that had a scholarly sort of academic conference at UC Berkeley. So my point is different departments have sort of different connections with Mongolia, which we try to bridge in our Mongolian Initiative program.
It seems there's a huge breadth of different scholarship out there and scholars who are focusing on it, and you're really trying to become a node and center for that, and it seems it's quite successful so far. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Yes.
But that's not the only initiative that you've taken while at Berkeley to further Mongolian studies and Mongolia in general. Tell us about the Mongolia Foundation, which you also founded.
Yes. Mongolia Foundation is a nonprofit educational cultural organization that I founded together with my colleagues, all professors, Professor Vesna Wallace, Patricia Berger, Whitney Hirscher, Matthew King, all University of California. University of California is a state university which has different campuses at different towns.
Right.
And so because we research Mongolia, our main expertise is Mongolia. Very oftentimes we cannot teach about Mongolia, and our courses cannot really be focused on Mongolia. For instance, myself, I've been at UC Berkeley as a lecturer teaching since 2010, but I was never able to teach a course really focused on Mongolia. My courses were the Himalayan or Asian art or Asian culture region really, and then where part of it is Mongolia. And so my colleagues, we really try to, with this foundation, to support education about Mongolia overseas. And what we do is we really do 2 major activities. One is we support Mongolian students. We create scholarship for Mongolian students who study at universities or colleges in the United States.
Wonderful.
And we know that it's very difficult financially for students, but we'd like to encourage Mongolians to study in the United States. And we're a very young organization, so our funding is very limited, but small goes long way. We try to support many Mongolian students, and it's already third year that we'll be giving out grants to Mongolian students.
Great.
And our second channel where we give donations and support is Mongolian artists that come to United States. We support them. So we supported several artists, such as we supported Naming, we supported Me Ц.Уранчимэг's work that was shown in the United States. We supported last year, we supported Soyuzma, whose work was part of our Mongolian Buddhism exhibition and conference. And we support their travel or their stay. We share the expenses with UC Berkeley, whatever the institution that arranges the event. And we hope to continue to be part of this sort of growing community in the United States for support of Mongolian knowledge, awareness of Mongolian culture and education.
That's fantastic. So you're extremely active in bridging these two societies and cultures, not just through art or discourse, but through action. That's very, very amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting, and it was my really privilege and honor to be part of this interesting program. Thank you.
The honor is all ours, yes. We wish you the best of holidays as well, this Naadam festivities.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for today's episode of Talk With Me, this special Naadam episode. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. That was our special guest, Dr. Urna Tsultam. We're here today in her exhibit, where she has a fantastic collection of contemporary artists on display. You can connect with us on Facebook. Our official page is Talk With Me, Star TV Mongolia. You can also watch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Star TV HD. We wish you a very happy Naadam. Bye, Shla. Seha Nadare.